Working with advanced schemas. Upon successful completion of this lesson, students should be able to objectives, explore the flat catalog schema design, explore the Russian doll schema design, explore the Venetian blind schema design, attach a schema to a namespace, apply a namespace to an instance document, import one schema file into another, reference objects from other schemas, objectives continued, declare a default namespace in a style sheet, specify qualified elements by default in a schema. Finally, integrate a schema and a style sheet with an instance document. The building blocks of any schema are the XML elements that define the structure. These are known collectively as objects. XML schema recognizes two types of scope, global and local. Objects with global scope are direct children of the root schema element and can be referenced throughout the schema document. Objects with local scope can be referenced only within the object in which they are defined. The distinction between global and local scope leads to three basic schema designs: flat catalog, Russian doll, and Venetian blind. Flat catalog design, sometimes referred to as salami slice design. All element and attribute definitions have global scope. The developer can then use references to the set of global objects to build the schema. Russian doll design. A Russian doll design has only one global element with everything else nested inside. The root element of instance document becomes the top element declaration in schema. All child elements within the root element are similarly nested in the schema. Venetian blind design. A Venetian blind design is similar to a flat catalog with some exceptions. A Venetian blind design represents a compromise between flat catalogs and Russian dolls. A benefit of XML vocabularies is the ability to use simple element names to describe data. A namespace is a defined collection of element and attribute names. Applying a namespace to an XML document involves two steps. Declare the namespace and identify the elements and attributes within the document that belong to that namespace. To declare and apply a namespace to a document, you add these attributes to an element in the document, where URI is the URI Uniform Resource Identifier of the namespace and schema is the location and name of the schema file. The number of namespace attributes that can be declared within an element is unlimited. This process involves two steps. Associate the namespace declaration with a prefix, and add the prefix to the tags for each element in the namespace. This is the general form, where prefix is the namespace prefix and element is the local part. An element name without a namespace prefix is referred to as an unqualified name. Namespaces have a scope associated with them. The scope of a namespace declaration extends from the beginning of the opening tag to the end of the corresponding closing tag. Declaring namespaces within a compound document, working with attributes. Like an element name, an attribute can be qualified by adding a namespace prefix. This is the syntax to qualify an attribute, where prefix is the namespace prefix and attribute is the attribute name. Unlike element names, there is no default namespace for attribute names. Default namespaces apply to elements, but not to attributes. Associating a schema with a namespace. This is the code to set the schema namespace, where prefix is the prefix of the namespace and URI is the URI of the namespace. Including schemas. To include a schema, you add this element. As a child of the root schema element, where schema is the name of the schema file to be included. Importing schemas. This is the syntax of the import element, where URI is the URI of the namespace for the imported schema, and schema is the name of the schema file. To reference an object from an imported schema, you must declare the namespace of the imported schema in the schema element. You can then reference the object using the ref attribute, or the type attribute for customized simple and complex types. The standard vocabularies that are shared throughout the world, such as XHTML, RSS, and MathML, can also be combined within a single compound document. To declare a namespace in a style sheet, you add this rule. To the CSS style sheet, where prefix is the namespace prefix and URI is the URI of the namespace. Both the prefix and the URI must match the prefix and URI used in the XML document. After you have declared a namespace in a style sheet, you can associate selectors with that namespace by adding the namespace prefix to each selector name separated with this symbol, as follows. See the example. You can force all elements and attributes to be qualified by adding this element and attributes to the root schema element in the schema file, where qualify is either qualified or unqualified. To require all elements to be qualified but not all attributes, you enter this code into the schema element. To set the qualification for individual elements or attributes by applying this form attribute to the definitions in the schema, where qualify is either qualified or unqualified.